holland.co.uk. And today I'm talking about my new book. This is a proof, it's not out yet. This is actually a wonderful paper copy. I'm so pleased to have it because although I have Kindle and PDF versions of it, there is nothing quite like holding a real book in your hand, is there? So today's webinar, and I'm really sorry that this is late, Google has changed something in the way it presents Hangouts, and it took me quite a while to get through the maze. And I hope you've hung on in there. For anyone who wants to ask questions, there should be a little question and answer box on the right of my screen. It should be on the right of yours too. So I'm going to be talking about the book. Not just about the contents of the book, although of course that will come into it, but the real main focus of this webinar is about the writing of the book, the creation of the book, what it was that made me write it, and how I went about it, and why I delayed 14 years before I did so, those sorts of things. And I hope that you will enjoy it. I hope you'll find it useful and interesting, and that it will inspire you to, to work towards being the greatest person, the greatest version of yourself that you can be. Because that's what I've done, that's what I've done with my life, and it's really paid off. It's really paid off. It's meant that I've been able to survive in a quite extraordinary way when somebody drove into me with their car. So what I'm going to begin with is telling you a little bit about myself, if you're new to me, and what I do, how I work. I'm a breathwork coach, essentially. And obviously an author. This is my fourth real paper book, but I have I think about 19 titles on Kindle and available in PDF. All of them sort of self-help in some way, quite a lot of them about treating your own physical pain, quite a lot of them about educating yourself, helping yourself to, for example, eat more raw food, how to prepare interesting main meals that haven't been cooked above 45 degrees C, and some other titles too about various topics. One of them is called Confidently Refuse Vaccinations. So various things that have I've gained quite a lot of experience in, and I felt that it's worth sharing. So I'll tell you a little bit about me, and then I will talk about the build up to writing the book, some of the things that happened, some of the interesting things, particularly about my realizations while I was writing it, which were about why I survived, why didn't I die, what it was like to be in a place of dying and then deciding not to. And also some of the extraordinary things that turned up while I was recovering, and I realised when they were filling in forms and there was no box for me, there was space for me to be ticked, and what that meant to me, and what it meant to my understanding and my education about healing, about people's general health, about the possibilities for health and increasing health, and the different ways that we can go about that. So I hope you find that interesting. This is being recorded, and I will be putting the link up on YouTube and on Facebook for people to watch it afterwards. This is not the advertised time. It's not the advertised link because I had to restart. So I will be endeavouring to put up the different link afterwards. Okay, so starting off with Indestructible Soul, how I decided not to die. It was a deliberate choice. And I will just outline to you now. My first exploration into personal growth and being conscious about creating my experience was a very long time ago. And I think probably in my early teens, I was aware that there was something in me that was a little bit different, that was a bit questioning, that didn't accept the status quo and felt that I had my own stamp, my original way of working in the world and creating the experience that I wanted, particularly of childbirth, particularly of having children, finding out as much as I could, educating myself, what my mother called running this like a project when I was pregnant with my first child, and really just wanting to know everything there was to know about each task I had in my life that I set myself to do, and then realizing how useful this is to other people. So at one point I was struggling in my relationship in my first marriage, and I went to relate. My husband came with me at one point, and the upshot of that was that I really realized that I needed to work on myself so that I wasn't afraid of living alone. I didn't want to be in a relationship because I was too frightened to be somewhere else. I wanted to be in a relationship because that was the right place to be. It was my choice, and it wasn't just because I was afraid of not being in a relationship. That wasn't a grown-up way to be. And so I found breathwork, I found rebirthing breathwork. I looked at other things, and that was the one I decided would be what I needed, and it turned out to be so. And before I'd even finished my own work with my rebirther, it was suggested to me that I should train, which is the most natural thing in the world. And breathwork has been the real mainstay of the growth that I've done. I've used lots of other techniques. I use voice dialogue. I use journaling. I use all sorts of other things, but the breathwork is really the thread running through it all. And so coming on to 15 years after I started breathwork, which I practice every week in a formal way, in an informal way, all the time. All of my breathing, I'm now aware. I'm aware when I slow it down. I'm aware when I depress it. And I remember consciously to start it. I have a little mechanism that puts a little flag up and says, Catherine, you've depressed your breathing. You're not breathing as fully as you need to be as active and energetic as you want to be. So then I do something about that. And so when it came to the year 2000 and I wasn't on my push bike, which I was usually on, I was actually learning to ride a little motorbike, and I'd done my CBT 3 weeks previously. And I'd been out climbing at the climbing centre, and I'd been dancing at the Fiddle and Bone to a lovely live band, playing the Star of the County Down, which is one of my favourites to dance to. And on my way back, almost home actually, it's only about 500 yards from where I was living, I was struck by a car. And I didn't get home for 5 weeks. I was hit directly in the leg, what they call a T-bone in the motorcycle world. Because I was a baby motorcyclist, I didn't know all this, and I didn't know that it was a common injury where a car drives into a motorcyclist in the leg. In this country, it's your left leg because cars drive on the left and they come out side turnings into your left leg, but it's very common, mostly with men because most motorcyclists in Britain are male, and because men wear trousers almost exclusively. Shorts have become a little more fashionable, but really almost exclusively here. I didn't know about this injury, and it's quite common, and I didn't know until I've only seen one other person with it and said, snap, when I was at a motorcycle track day event. So I was hit, and the skin and muscle were pulled off my lower leg. I lost almost every muscle attachment, almost every tendon was severed. The bones were crushed, and I was in a very bad way, bleeding heavily. The risk to my life at that point was because my blood was pouring out very, very quickly, and I lost half of it in a couple of minutes. I don't know if it was the tourniquet that was applied by the ambulance staff that arrived after some time, or whether my arteries had closed themselves, because I know that's what happens if your blood pressure drops, suddenly your arteries shut. Whether it was that natural stoppage that saved my life. But I did get to the point where my consciousness travelled away from my body, and I was aware that the pain had stopped. I was aware that although I was still me, my body was below me, I was above it. I was what you would call floating. I didn't have a body, but I was still very much myself. So my consciousness was totally as me, as Catherine, as the person I know well. And my body, which was in a parlous state and was obviously losing consciousness very quickly. I don't understand quite how consciousness and spirit are together in the same place at the same time. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I do know that my soul is separate from my body. While I'm alive, they occupy more or less the same space. Not quite, but more or less. And they are both centered roughly in the same place. So this separation, I was extremely tempted to continue, to go away from my body, to carry on away, to maintain the position of no pain. The pain had been so big I hadn't known where it was coming from. And it was very tempting indeed. But there was a question posed in my mind, which was, do you wish to continue where there's no pain, or do you wish to return and see your children grow up? And I chose to return. I didn't have to take long to make that decision. My children, as our children are very precious to me. My relationship with them at that time was very, very close, and I was a single parent and had been for many years. So that was my pull back, and I don't think, had I not had children, I don't think I would have come back. It was a very, very delicately balanced situation. So I moved back into this body full of pain, and I really didn't know where the injury was. I couldn't tell. Pain was so all-encompassing, and it was just filled my consciousness completely. And I asked somebody to hold my hand because I was aware that I was ebbing away. My consciousness was moving out of my body. And in the biological sense, dying and death are quite lonely. And I wanted somebody with me. I don't know who it was. Somebody held my hand. And at some point, the police came and they questioned me. I'd already made the decision to live. So by then, I was aware that I was on the road to recovery. Strange, isn't it? They'd only just arrived. They saw the accident as pretty immediate. For me, it was in the past. And that decision, I think, was really, really powerful in my recovery. So, yes, the police asked me who I was. What else did they ask me? What I'd been drinking, where I'd been, what I'd been doing. And of course, I said a pint of water. That's what I drink. And I'd been dancing and climbing. And they asked me about contacting my children. Took them a long time to wake them up. It was 10:30 at night when the accident happened. And the driver was drunk. His wife got out of the car and said, "Oh, you're all right," and went to get back in. And at that point, I managed to open my eyes with fury. Fury is a good energy booster. I was absolutely livid. And I managed to say to her, "No, I'm not." I really growled at her. I was so angry. And the passers-by stopped them from driving away. So they were drunk enough to think, A, that I wasn't injured, and B, that it would be fine to get back in the car and drive home. I stayed conscious. I remember bouncing on the road. I had helmet and leathers on. I didn't have the same level of leather protection, gear protection I have now, because at that time, it's going to plug my computer in so it doesn't keep dimming and distracting me. At that time, I was a very new beginner. I had some equipment, but I didn't have full motorcycle equipment I have now. So I had a good biker jacket with proper padding. I had a pair of leather trousers, which I don't think were entirely for motorcycling. I'm not sure now whether they had padding in. And I had Doc Martens on. I didn't have motorcycle boots on. The leather trousers kept my leg on, because my leg was only being held on by pretty much by skin. And the Doc Martin, my son, came down. It's only a few hundred yards from the house. My son came down the next day to find one Dr. Martin boot in the road. He thought he might find the bike, but the police had taken the bike and it was scrapped. So yeah, I was taken by a long trip by ambulance to hospital, and they asked me if I'd passed out, and I hadn't. And I found out later that that's an indicator of whether you're likely to survive, because if you pass out and you go unconscious after losing half your blood, you're quite unlikely to come back to consciousness again, and the risk of your dying in the night is very high indeed. And I didn't lose consciousness. I never did lose consciousness, apart from the moment when I travelled to the point of making a decision about whether I might die or not. And I don't know whether that counts as unconscious, because I was still aware. So I don't know. If your body loses consciousness, is your consciousness somewhere else? I don't know. So there we are. That's my story of what happened, or what brings me to the writing of the tale. I had a number of remarkable things that happened, and that's part of what I want to tell you about. But just now, I'd like to start with talking about writing the book itself. So some of the things that happened, after this accident and after I recovered, I was upset to learn that the company I'd been working for had been sold. And when I got back to work on my crutches, there wasn't going to be a job for me anymore, which was really sad. I was working as a graphic designer for a company that provided the stationery services to Severn Trent, company Severn Trent Limited. And it was a super place to work. It was a lovely little team, and I really enjoyed it. Anyway, the company had been sold while I wasn't looking to another company who had decided they didn't want our print department and they were going to close us down. So that was all very sad. And it gave me the impetus to think, well, would I set up as my own design business, or would I do something else? And I was lying on the sofa with my leg up. I had my leg up for about 5 years. I was lying on the sofa with my leg up, and I thought about the woman who I'd gone to treat my injury. She was the person who really helped to get the blood flow back through my injured leg and to help me to recover. And I phoned her and I said, what do you think of me training to do what you do? Because I was so thrilled with what she was doing. And she said, I was waiting for you to ask. So that sent me on the training, doing all of the anatomy and physiology, all of the exams I needed, all of the practical training I needed. It was a super place. It's the Northern Institute in Bury in Lancashire, for anybody who's interested in training to treat physical injuries, and a diploma in remedial massage was a fabulous place to begin. And so I ended up with a new career from this. For 14 years, I ran a pain clinic in Oxford. And so obviously informed by my personal experience as well as my training, that's what I ended up doing, and being inspired by being treated myself. And while I was treating people, I would often talk about my experience. It was relevant, especially if they were worried that they wouldn't be able to get well. Very occasionally, I would have to roll up my trousers and say to somebody, look, this is the nature of the type of injury that I've healed, and you can heal yours too. And that was just so useful. So that was useful. And it was almost now, looking back and getting into the area where I am back now, where I'm working with inspiration and breath again, and encompassing all of the other experiences I've gained along the way with pain treatment and recovery, I really felt that was so useful and inspiring. So people would say to me, when are you going to write a book about this? And because I've written books before, I had it in the back of my mind, and I think I really put it off because it felt unfinished. It felt tricky, I don't know, painful perhaps, reminding me of some very difficult things that happened. The biggest problem for me was that they insisted on putting me on antibiotics, which I'm allergic to. So I had huge difficulties with sleeping, with being frightened. They make me afraid of everything, which I didn't need at that time. And yeah, all things I really needed to sleep. So it was very tough. And finally, I got a sensible doctor who wasn't in the hospital, he was a locum, who said to me, well, if you don't have an infection, then stop taking them. Thank goodness. And from then on, I felt better and I could sleep, which was wonderful. Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why perhaps it took 14 years to write it. But I did then begin. In 2014, I began to write about it and come up against some really interesting things, one of which was I felt really physically sick. And I was really baffled by that. It was very odd. And it happened the first 2 times. And I don't know if it's coincidence, because I was promised myself that on a train journey I would start to write. And I felt really sick. And I don't know if it's because I was on a train, it didn't happen again. So the first 2 times I started, I felt sick, and I felt sick for some hours. And I loosened my clothes, I was thinking, oh, it's something tight. Anyway, so that was one of the things that happened. And I think this is just going to be a half an hour, this webinar, because it took me so long to start. So we have about 8 minutes left. And I would be very happy to talk more about this and about the book itself. If anybody wants to ask me questions, feel free to put them in the box now or to email me later, Catherine@catherineholland.co.uk. And just for now, I'm going to tell you about some of my inquiries and some of the conclusions that I came to about, for example, why didn't I die of the lack of blood? Because my inquiries afterwards and during my training to treat physical injuries, I discovered that if you lose more than about 15% of your blood, that's 1/5, you're very likely to die. And then it explained why. You die of toxicity, which is the build-up of natural breakdown products, particularly from proteins in the body, but from all of the body's mechanisms, which get cleansed and then excreted by the kidneys. If you lose a lot of blood, your kidneys shut down, so does your liver. And so you're not able to metabolize or to excrete. And normally the toxins would build up in your body and you would die of poisoning. And I believe the reason that I didn't is because I only drink water. I was vegan and had been for a long time at that point, and half my food was raw. This breathing practice, it increases your breathing rate by about 50%. And because 70% of the body's toxins are removed in the breathing, in the out-breath, that means that my body and my blood was much cleaner than the average person. That's why I believe that I survived. Because only my brain had blood flowing around it properly at that point, and I couldn't open my eyes for about 6 weeks, which is quite strange, isn't it? I couldn't read, I couldn't think. Yeah, it was a strange old process. So it took about 3 or 5 days for me to open my eyes at all. Yeah, they're all very interesting. And I believe that I didn't die in the night afterwards because I decided to live. And the night staff were wary. I was right by the nurse's station. And I think they were watching me very carefully. But I was absolutely secure that I decided, and I was fine with that. And I had no pain. It's really interesting. After the initial pain and the initial first perhaps 24, 48 hours while I was stabilising, it was quite painful. And I had many operations in that time, or two major operations, many hours of operations. And by the third day, that was all done. And I had an external fixator, a big metal bar in my leg, screwed in 3 places above the ankle vertically, 3 places below the knee horizontally, in the sort of dog's bone, shaped bone under your knee. So I had no metal inserted, which I was pleased about. Then I had, that was to hold the bone in place. And what my surgeon did was to pick up all the broken pieces and put them in the gap to give my body something to use, some raw material to use to rebuild the bone, which was entirely repaired completely. You couldn't see the difference eventually. There was no sign at all. Even the holes where the screws had been put in had healed up. So yeah, he did that. And then the person who did my skin grafts and muscle and tendon repairs did that the next day. I had another operation. So the first one was about 6 hours. The second one, I think about the same. There was a huge amount of work involved. And about 32 people ended up in the operating theatre while he was asking various members of staff for their advice and support in this operation. So I'm very, very grateful for the work that was done there, and also for my body that just really manfully rolled up its sleeves and got on with repair. It was like being in a ship's engine room with a huge pulsating engine. My whole body was sort of beating to this rhythm. I think I lost about half my weight as well. Certainly this leg was about that thick. It looked initially like a plate of raw liver. And yeah, it took some time for all of that to begin to look like a leg again. And then more recently, I remember I was sorting through my garage and I found a box of cards people had sent me. And it was fascinating to read and to look at them, because I had a very faint recollection once I saw them. But to all intents and purposes, it was sort of wiped out of my memory. Yeah, that was very strange. I'm just going to look and see if it tells me the time that this began, because I would like to know how long I've got. I'm not sure that it does. Does it say? Oh, I see. So there is actually only 1 minute left. So what I'd better do is to sign off and to say I would love to answer your questions if you'd like to get in touch with me, and that I will be now in another webinar promoting a group program, a group online program that I'm going to be presenting, because this webinar has been half the length I thought it was going to be. Thank you for watching. Please do get in touch if you'd like to, and have a discussion with me about working with your breath, working with your health, anything else that you believe that I can help you to bridge with, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.